All right. Okay. We're good. All right. So today our speaker is Pat Viafore. I met him in Alabama. My first time speaking at a conference at DevSpace, and I got to attend his talk, and it was amazing, and it inspired me because I was just starting on a new team, and I think it's great for anybody like working on a team. And so he has a lot of great things to say. So please welcome Pat. You can take it away.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Mic check.
Yes.
All right. Is it loud enough for everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Okay. I'm on a Linux laptop, so audio is always an adventure every time I present. Hi. Yeah, my name is Pat Viafore. Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me here. Let me show my screen. I'm going to go through my talk that I gave at DevSpace. Share screen. Is this the right window? Can you see a black screen?
No.
Nope, you see my slides? Bear with me. I'm not used to Zoom. Zoom is not letting me share my screen. I'm going to drop off and join right back and see if that fixes anything. Unless you guys... Oh, here we go. I'm going to drop off. I'll come right back.
All right, sounds good.
There we go. And I lost it. I know, real exciting so far. Now you should see a black screen.
I know it's been one of those days for me. Like anything that can go wrong has gone wrong.
Yeah. Do you see a black screen?
It's starting to share screen. Yeah.
Yep. As a matter of fact, it says you are viewing Pat's Viafore screen.
Yep, so black, then white. You good?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's go. So, like I said, my name is Pat Viafore, and I'm actually going to start off with a quote from a pretty well-known book. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epic of belief, it was the epic of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. Do I have any lit nerds in the group who knows what book this is from?
A Tale of Two Cities?
Ding, 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 we have a winner, A Tale of Two Cities, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. In fact, I'm actually going to talk about A Tale of Two Developers. Meet Alex and Sam. We are going to see Sam's view as they go through a whole new company and what that entails. I did not draw these images. My 4-year-old daughter did. You can tell that she drew them because they're way better than anything I could have drawn. So let's get started. It was the best of times. Look at all this cool tech we have everywhere around us. It was the worst of times. We've all dealt with package incompatibilities. It was an age of wisdom. Refactoring this component makes the future work easy. It was an age of foolishness. Never trust someone who says they can convert to microservices by Friday. It was the epic of belief. We know we can deliver products that meet users' needs. And it was the epic of incredulity. What do you mean when you say, I need to scale a database transaction with LLM? Sometimes your product managers just come at you and throw words together. You're not quite sure they know what they're talking about. It was a season of light. I understand the code. Everything's so clear. This is Season of Darkness. Yeah, as long as you have dark mode. Like I said, we're talking about 2 developers today, and we're going to look at just contrasting journeys and what we can draw from their experiences. Completely made up, very based off experiences that I've had, and we're going to see how these developers work. So let's talk about Alex first. Alex, he speeds through code, works code 3 times faster than all the other developers on his team. He knows the framework that you're using in depth, in and out. He refactors code to use the latest standard once it comes out. And we have Sam. Sam's competent. She's good. She's average speed as a developer. Maybe not blowing anyone off in the charts, but she does well. She's played around with a few frameworks. She's more broad than to have deep technical knowledge. Absolutely would love to have her on a team, but she's not going to be doing the nitty-gritty of your frameworks. And she tends to stick to well-known language features. What I'd like to ask at this point is, if you had to hire one of these 2 people on this very one-dimensional aspects that I've shown so far, who would you hire? I'm just going to imagine everyone says Alex. You can feel free to chime in and interrupt me. Questions are welcome throughout this as well. Most people are going to say Alex. Yeah, it sounds like he just is the far better developer. But then you get to interviewing both of these 2 people, and it turns out Alex, he throws his work over the wall. He finishes a feature and says, well, this is the tester's job now. I'm done, and goes on to the next thing. A speed up has to come from somewhere. He doesn't have time for junior engineers. He thinks they're beneath him. He has more important senior work to do. And his code is quite complex, and others really can't maintain it because he's the only one who understands it. And ops testing and maintenance can't keep up. It's not just that his teammates can't keep up. The people who have to support this, test it, maintain it, they can't keep up with the sheer amount of code that he's throwing into the system. And we take a look at Sam. Sam involves all of her teams to work. She talks to the ops people, she talks to the testing people, she talks to the maintainers, and makes sure that everyone's on board with the changes she's making, to make sure that there's no hidden gotchas later on. She writes tests to make sure that her code will always work. She believes mentoring is extra important. She seeks out those junior engineers and tries to just be a good role model for them. And she loves building tools that make everyone else go faster. Now, if I had to ask you, which one would you hire? I'm hoping most people are like, I'd rather have a Sam on my team than an Alex. And some people might be going, I think I have an Alex on my team. If anyone on the call is named Alex, I apologize. I do not mean to group all Alexes as some sort of negative light, but these are the names we picked. So, the heart of this talk is going to be about collaborative developer experience, what I call CDX. We see developer experience used a lot in our, just looking around at the buzzwords on, Hacker News or wherever your tech aggregator news site is. And most of it is consumer developer experience. Hey, here's a new IDE. Here's a new CI runner. And we don't often talk about how we can collaborate with our teammates and improve their developer experience. I mentioned Alex being a 3x engineer. Well, he might be able to individually write 3 times as much code as everyone else, but we saw that doesn't quite scale. But if we take a look at Sam, and she makes a tool that makes everyone just 5% faster, you throw that in front of 100 developers, and you're going to beat that 3x. So this is going to be a talk about how we make people around us better, make them faster, and just make more pleasant to work with. So we're going to be going on a journey. I mentioned it already about how Sam and Alex, they're going to be starting a new career. And they're looking at companies, and they're in the interview stage. So the interview stage, this is really the first impressions that people have of your job. So let's talk about how these people approach interviewing. So Alex says, when I interview, I expect elite computer science knowledge. Rock stars only hire other rock stars. We know the type, right? People who say, if you're not doing the hardest leak codes, don't even bother applying here. If you can't write an A-star algorithm in your sleep, I don't want to hear about you. Sam says, I want to be respectful of interviewees' time, a few 1-hour broad interview sessions. Again, she's more focused on breadth rather than depth. When we interview, we look for signals. If you've never heard the term before, it's pretty much saying you have a limited amount of time that you are interviewing someone. They have interviews for other companies. They probably have their own day job they're working on, plus all sorts of stresses of family life and anything else involved. So you have precious little time for the people you interview. You look for the signals that they emit during the interview to tell you some very important information. Number one, can they do the job? If your job is not super heavy algorithmically, don't do heavy algorithms testing or interviewing rather. I know it's an easy way to just say, yep, I'm going to make sure I just weed out all the applicants, but you're not getting a good idea of can people actually do the job that you're hiring them for. So one part of the interview is, do they have the technical chops? And if you're working in systems design, you might ask operating systems questions. If you're working in web development, you might talk about HTTP protocols and things of that nature. Tailor the topics to the work you actually do. It's harder. It is more work to do that. A lot of the things I'm going to say are, yep, it's a little more work to do these things, but it's worth it in the end because you're going to attract better quality candidates. The other half of the interview is, can you actually work with them? All too often, we focus so much on the technical parts. I once went to a job interview, and the interview was done by a third party, and it was just a technical screen. And I had to do a round or two of that, and then I would get to talk to the team with like a manager interview, and based on the manager interview, whether I had it or not, I didn't get any sense of can I work with the people that I need to be working with. Sure, I had a manager, but what about my teammates? What about other teams? Making sure that your teams can work with the person you're interviewing is super important as well. And so what's tricky is you have to try to get both of these pieces in a very short amount of time. Alex is going to say, here's a take-home test, IQ test, 5 interviews, HR culture fit, 2 manager interviews, and a mock feature. I worked at a place where this is not an exaggeration. Just lots of stories there. Sounds pretty awful. Nobody's got time for that. Sam wonders, how can I maximize the information I receive? So in these sort of things, we look for, how can I have one question or one conversation tell me multiple things? And I'd like to share some of the interview questions that I like to use. Tell me about your favorite project. I love starting off an interview with this after we've gotten past the pleasantries. I want to know, what do you like? What do you love doing? If the person who's interviewing is going to be talking about, a tool that they built and why they like it, how it's helping people, I'm looking for how well do they communicate? Do they have passion for what they do? Or at least, are they at least excited to do that? What are their technical competencies? Because you can get an idea, you can ask follow-on questions. Oh, why did you make that decision? Well, what technology stack did you use? People like to talk about themselves a little bit, but an interview is such a stressful point to do that. Trying to hone in on something where this is something you liked doing. Please tell me about it. I want to learn about it. And you get to learn about a lot of cool things that people do. Once they tell me about their favorite project, I'll ask, what contributions are you proud of? I've been in a few interviews where I've been interviewing, and someone would go on and on about a project they worked on. And I'd ask, great, what did you do on it? And they said, oh, I joined in the last month. I didn't really do anything. Like, why did we spend the past 5-6 minutes talking about this? So I like drilling down to see what did you do in the project. It tells me a few other things. If they're humble or arrogant, is a great way of. This is a great question for figuring out that. You can decide which one you want in your team based on team culture. It tells me do they know how to carve out a specific feature or subset of the project they worked on and talk about that rather than the amorphous like, yeah, I built a Twitter clone. It tweets or X, whatever it is now. I want to know, what did you work on? Did you do database work? Did you do any of that? I'm trying to make sure that the actual competencies that the person has is a good fit for my team. Again, trying to make the multiple signals in a single question. And then often follow up, what would you have done differently? The biggest red flag to this question is, oh no, everything was perfect. I wouldn't change a thing. Most people on their favorite project are like, I got this laundry list of things to do. Here, I'm looking for, can this person retrospect? And can they understand what needs to change? And do they understand where deficiencies are and how to make trade-offs? I'm looking for multiple things in a single question. These aren't the only questions out there. Please use whatever you want, but just take away. Think of how many different things you can get from a single conversation. We also often prioritize writing code in interviews, and everyone gets nervous writing on a whiteboard or whatever, HackerRank or whatever sharing platform there is. I've found this far more useful. Just think about it. How much code do you write? And then how much code do you read? Which dominates your job? Typically, it's going to be reading. So have somebody read some code. Take 5-10 minutes and I like asking, what do you think about this? What did you see? What didn't you see? I like to put bugs in there, performance, things that aren't great performance-wise. Maybe they're slow. I like to put things that could be refactored that aren't clear. but I encourage them to ask questions because that's what I'm going to do with them if they're my teammate. I'm going to be saying, hey, I'm code reviewing your code. Can you tell me about it? Being able to communicate about what you wrote is super helpful. I had an unfortunate person I was mentoring that she did really great. She had a lot of heart. She couldn't explain her code, and we had to work a lot on that to say, look, kind of coding by trial and error. We got to work on making sure you can explain it to others. So finding that out during an interview is way better than finding it out when you've been working with them for a month. Also having them know how to change code. So if they say, hey, you were doing a quadratic search here, it should be, linear. I'll say, can you just go change it for me? And finding these little small snippets, I've already given them a few minutes to get used to the code, tells me far more signals than just saying, here's a leak code of how to do this crazy dynamic programming. I think I've used dynamic programming once in my career, like in a job. And I'm a CS guy. I love computer science. Hard computer science problems, I just haven't had to do. And in a lot of my jobs, I've been working for over 15 years. Yeah, algorithmic analysis is super important. But the things like how certain like auto balancing trees or dynamic programming or greedy programming, very rarely does that come up. So very rarely do I interview for it because that's not the sort of problems that I work on. If those are the problems that you work on, then you should be interviewing for those. I also like asking people to pick a moderately advanced feature for a language, a library, or framework. This can tell me a lot how deep you know knowledge of the languages that they use and how well they can communicate new ideas. I'll often ask them to say, hey, I'm a junior who wants to use something different. Convince me as if I'm a junior engineer for whatever advanced feature. So I'm a C++ dev, a C++ and a Python dev. And I once asked this, and someone's like, oh, I'm really good at C++. And it was someone who had like 5 or 10 years of experience. And then I said, okay, give me an advanced feature, expecting they'd use something like iterators or lambda expressions or templates or something that, you don't just pick up in your CS 101 class. And they said, oh, yeah, I'm going to tell you about casting, casting something from an int to a float. And, from a junior, okay, I'm going to let that slide. But if you've had 5 to 10 years in the language and you're saying you're really good at it and you pick something kind of basic like that, and I prompted, and it told me what I needed to know, that they had just done very, very shallow level, but they were honestly arrogant about it. And that was a ding against them while we were interviewing. Again, I ask something for technical, but I'm also seeing, can I work with you? And I'm looking at real world scenarios like, tell me why we should use this framework. Remember that your interviews are a first impression. Whatever you project as an interviewer, that's your first impression that you're giving to the person you're interviewing. Many times if you think back when you've interviewed for wherever you are right now, you might have been able to spot some yellow flags or red flags just from the interview alone. And in my experience, a lot of those red flags I see during an interview crop up once I start working there. You get a pretty good gut feeling the more you do this. So you have to think about what is the impressions that I'm giving to the people that interview with my organization. If I'm giving heavy CS interviews and they aren't asking a lot about culture fit, how well they work, how well they read code, I'm going to assume that all the other people on the team have lots of good CS knowledge, but don't know how to work with others, don't know how to communicate because they're not screening for that interview. Be deliberate in what you're looking for. So that's an interview, and I mentioned first impressions, and I want to talk about the second first impression, which is onboarding. The first day, week, month of a new job is super stressful. Imposter syndrome's kicking in for whoever's just starting. Let's see what Alex and Sam have to say. So Alex says, when I joined, they told me it'd be a year before I'd be productive. I bet I can do it in 3 months. Has anyone here ever been told when they walk into an organization first day, they're like, don't be worried if you're not productive for the first 3, 6, 9 months, a year. Is anyone just on the call? I've had it happen to me twice. And at the time, I was a lot younger, and I had this little pride, like, I'm going to be better than that. I can do it in less than a year. But I never stopped and thought, why do I have to wait a year before I'm productive? I want to be productive right now. Sam, on the other hand, she was asked to make a small commit day 1, then a tiny fix a few days later. She talked with her mentor, and she had a whole game plan for her for onboarding. When someone's onboarding into your team, set clear expectations for them. What do you expect of them? What is a normal progression? And think, are there ways we can improve this? So I am a big proponent of there should always be a mentor. A job I joined a few years ago, I was coming in with about 12 years of experience. And I think there's a team of like 7 or 8, maybe 2 people had more years of experience than I did. And I was assigned a mentor. And you know what? I loved it. It was so nice being mentored because even though I was coming in as a senior engineer, I don't know the domain. I don't know the team culture. I don't know the organization. I don't know our policies. I need somebody who can help guide me those, whose door is always open. So I had a great mentor who just said, you know what, here's your clear expectations. You should know this, within the first week. Here's what you should know within the first month. And I'm going to help you get there. And here's how. I also like measuring time to commit. From the day that someone walks in, how quickly do they make a commit into your system? I've been in a place where it's the first or second day. First day's maybe HR. I've been in places where it's literally been 2 months before I've committed. And I keep asking, like, hey, I'm ready to work. Inside I'm going, imposter syndrome's kicking in. Why am I not contributing to the team? I don't know if many of you have been there, but starting a new job, always stressful for me. But it was way nicer when I knew, okay, hey, yeah, I made a commit the second day. It wasn't much, but I'll know I'll grow. It's that incremental progress that we like seeing. Just like we don't want to do big bang integrations in code, we don't want to wait for new hires to be productive for a few months beforehand, especially with turnover rates and layoffs. There's like the worst thing would be like, all right, yep, it'll be a year until you're productive. And you know what? They leave a year and a half later because they weren't feeling fulfilled. Not great. I also like measuring time to a productive commit. So I differ this from time to commit of the literal first commit. It could just be updating documentation. And I do encourage anyone I mentor to document a lot as they go on. But there's a time to productive commit as well. The first time they're taking a story off the backlog, or the first time they're implementing a feature on their own, or adding a big swath of tests. I like measuring this too. In my current job, I like aiming around 3 to 4 weeks for this. I work on a big complex system at the moment. Previous jobs, it might have been, hey, at the end of the week, you should be able to do something. But the point is as a mentor, I am there to help facilitate that success. It is my job as a mentor to make sure that whoever's onboarding has everything they need, an open door that they need to, any questions they have. And I do periodic check-ins. The first week, I do a daily check-in. Second and third week, I do every other day. And then by the fourth week, it goes down to about once a week. And most of the people I mentor end up keeping a weekly one-on-one, which I find super helpful. I work remote, so one-on-ones are great for me to learn about team. But so here's my example of what I work on as a game plan for when I'm mentoring someone. This is not prescriptive. You don't have to do exactly what I say. This is more of an example of a game plan. And I encourage everyone to create a game plan whenever someone new starts on their team. So day one, I want the team and organization explained. Hey, here's our team. Here's what we do. Here's our management chain. And here's maybe 2 or 3 other teams you'll hear us talk about. I might talk about high-level product use cases. We make this sort of software. Here's how our user uses it. Here's our main demographic. And maybe go over it with them if they're unfamiliar with it. I make sure that they have an environment set up on that first day so that they can go look through code, be curious, go see what they can understand. And I try to get them to make a commit to some team tools repository. Again, this could be a documentation, maybe a small refactor. Typically, I have a nice list of small things. It's like, I'm never going to work on these things. I could do them in 10 minutes. This is a great way to introduce someone to our code base, our build process, and how to understand, how to make a PR and that workflow of getting it into production. There could be, bots that check certain things and introducing them to that. But I start small. In the first week, I'll talk more about what are our team policies. Hey, we always have 2 reviewers on a code review. Or, we always aim for this amount of coverage. I'll give them a tour of our repository. Hey, here's the big things you want to use. You don't need to go understand the whole swath of things. Here's just the small things. And I'll give them a first mini project, and I'll often do this as a pair programming. I'll talk more about pair programming later. But I like doing that throughout the first week. Week 2, I start diving into functionality. Let's talk about the code that we touch the most often and why it's doing the things we're doing. I have them shadow an engineer on the team because they don't need to have interaction with me, their mentor. I want to make sure they're understanding what other people's strengths are as well. I give them another second mini project. So by the end of the second week, my goal is they've made a commit, they've worked on a project with me so they can understand, get their feet underneath them, and then they work on a project by themselves. I'm still there, open for guidance, but it's that incremental progress I was talking about. Well, and then on week 3 to 4, I have them shadow other engineers and work on a first project. This might be not something that might take someone who knows the code base a day or two, but when you're new to a code base, learning how to test everything, give them a week or two. So I'm giving them room to grow. It's important to realize that, yeah, they're not going to know the code as well as you do. They're not going to know, how all the pieces fit together. They're going to understand that through organic exploration of the code base, and you need to give them time to do that. So that's all I have to say about onboarding. Next, I want to talk about exploring code. So I mentioned a little bit of this onboarding, but how do we go through a code base? So Alex says, oh, finally, I got a ticket to work on, 3 months in or whatever. I have to fix something in this million line of code base. Where do I start? And then he spends the next 5 days just trying to figure out where that is. Sam says, this code base is huge and I don't understand it. Thankfully, I can just stick to 3 folders with really good docs around them. If you have to have someone go touch, half the folders in your big old repository, it's probably not a great first ticket. But it also tells you something that your code base is not super healthy. So code organization is important. How do we organize our code so that similar things are near similar things? Like all my GUI stuff is over here. My database transactions are over here. I don't need them all split out because that overwhelms people when they're just starting to understand your code. Documentation is also super important. And I say this, and most people think of like the following: hey, help, this code base is too confusing. So I was like, yeah, I got documentation. And they hand you an out-of-date wiki. It was last updated 4 years ago, and the user was deleted because they no longer work here. And they were left to drown by yourself with this unclear wiki. Good documentation requires curation. It requires effort, but it pays off. And you don't want to document everything, because the more you document, the quicker it's going to go out of date. Document the big things and think about how someone is going to come into your project and how they get around. We're really talking about discoverability. How easy is it for someone to discover the documentation? Crucially, independently. If you have to say, hey, here, I have this wiki, I have to spend 2 days setting up an IT ticket so that you can go get access to this wiki, and I just remember what pages I have to go to. That's not great. You want your documentation to be discoverable. And the thing to think about is, well, your code base is what they're interacting with. Can they discover documentation from your code base? Git commits are documentation. Comments are documentation. If I'm in a code base, the first thing I'm reading are comments. Now, I know they may be wrong, but I can at least get the hint of what's going on. And this is why you document the bigger ideas, so that you can say, oh yeah, this is not going to change as much. This is the why or the rationale of something. But then I'm a huge fan of READMEs, even a README per folder if it's a big enough project. I'm working on a project right now where there are 300 Visual Studio projects in the repository, and like 6 of them have repos, or 6 of them have READMEs. So it's like, I don't know why is this folder here? What is that folder? I can't discover that. From READMEs, you can then link to your external resources, your wikis, your confluences, document portals, SharePoint, whatever you use. If I can have a path from there, from the code, and when I say code, I mean the code base, which is any checked-in artifact with the code, which like a README, or git commit, or a comment, or the code itself, anything that can reference other things, that gives me that organic growth, of that organic exploration of the code base. And that will help your brain just process it better when you go, oh, I understand how I got from here to there, rather than someone saying, oh, you need to know how to test? Well, I just have a bookmark, and you're going to have to bookmark it too. It doesn't scale. So I mentioned close to code already. You also want your documentation to be navigatable. It should not be an uncurated mess. It should be very clear. I like hierarchical structures of here's a top level concept, here's some more pages if you want more information. But I don't need everything on a single page or read. Break things up a little bit, but make sure they're navigatable. Give the links, the cross links between everything. When the internet was being discussed in its early stages, one of the big things everybody wanted was, hyperlinks are what's going to change the future, because we can cross-link all this information. And I'm not saying it's a perfect scheme. There, you can definitely have just spaghetti mess of links. But if you're smart about it, if you curate it, you can actually have really nice flow through your documentation. You also have to think about how you embed knowledge. So if anyone ever says, oh, go ask this person, they know what to do, that doesn't scale. Because every person who joins will have to go ask that person, and that person will leave one day. I've seen some people set up question and answer sites, like Stack Overflow, in their just internal to the company where people can ask questions. And I came to a realization one day. Every time someone asks a question to someone, is telling me, hey, I need this information to do my job, and there are no resources that I can find independently. I need to ask someone. As organizations get bigger, it just doesn't work. And the response was, yeah, but with a question and answer site, someone will document it there and it's great, but the search was awful. So nobody ever went searching for answers in there. They just re-asked the questions and the same expert answered again and again. Make it so that people can find out information independently. Your code base is your single source of truth. When you think about code, it doesn't matter how much documentation or wikis, whatever you have, all of that could be wrong. Your code base is what is true. So you have to think about what to reflect in code base. If it's some implementation detail that's going to change and change and change, do not document that anywhere. Keep it in the code and let the code base be clear enough that it can explain this is the implementation detail. If you have rationale, I did this even though it's not the fastest search because I need it to be stable, or I need to be able to stop it and restart it at a later date, or just partially sort something. That's information that should be in a commit message or a comment with the code. As you get into hey, here's how the big pieces connect together. I have a publisher subscriber for statuses. I have, a message broker over here for external databases. That's the sort of thing that goes in a README, so that people, when they say, oh, how does this project work? Oh, okay, here's what I say. And more importantly, in your README, also have instructions for people to set things up and how to use things. Oh, I have to set up a message broker to talk to databases? Oh, no, I saw on the README that I could just load this one little sub-project and it mocks out everything. Fantastic. Give people ways to succeed. You also, in your code base, want to talk about roadmaps. So it should be very clear to people who work on your code, where is this code heading? Are there big architectural pieces coming up? Oh, we're going to remove this our little security module here because it's using deprecated hashing functions or something like that. And so in an upcoming commit, we're going to be updating this. It prevents people from refactoring things that might be ripped out a week or two later. You also want your code to be reasonable. And I mean this by I should look at code and I should be able to reason about it. There's the law of least surprise. If I look at a function, if I just read the name of the function and its signature, what it's returning, what's passed into it, I should not be surprised when I look at the implementation of that function. Early on in my career, I had a bug. It was one of the worst bugs I looked at. It was an embedded bug. I couldn't get a debugger on it. And I pretty much had to bisect code. Comment out half the code. Does the bug still happen? And of course, I'd comment out something that prevents the board from being brought up. So I just was banging my head. And it turned out that I finally found a function called getEvent. And that function set the event to some newly allocated memory. GetEvent set the event. I was very surprised. And because I didn't understand what that did, I had introduced a bug. But there's a reason, I couldn't reason about the code. If code's super spread out, I can't reason about it. You also have to think about how you scale your abstraction from your code base. So I like to think that architecture is kind of recursive. I look at a big 10,000 foot view and I expect boxes and arrows. Publishers, maybe some facades, observers, whatever. How do the pieces, monitoring talks to my database. My ordering system talks to the database. I have a view talking to my ordering. But then I should be able to look into anything. Okay, ordering. Let's take a look at ordering. I have to have customer handling. I have to have, cart management. I can keep going down to each one of those, and I should see a similar abstraction. When I look at a big top-level diagram, I don't want to see, here's the SQL statement that's used to generate this, and here's the all the 5 columns that it needs, because for the whole entire system, that's just honestly exhausting. I want to say, oh, I care about ordering. Let me read about the ordering. Oh, I care about cart management. Let me go down there. And each level of abstraction that I go down should be an appropriate granularity. Now, Sam says, I'm worried my code base isn't healthy. How do I know if it's good or not? Now it says, all code is beep, censored out. So, code base health. How can you tell your code is healthy? Well, I like these three things. Just as a quick little check, are most changes hard? Does it feel like you're always swimming upstream in your code base, where it's like everything is just hard? It feels hard. The way to tackle this came from Kent Beck, I believe it was, is make the hard changes easy. That's the hard part. And then make the easy change. This works especially well when you have to make hard changes in the same code again and again and again and again and again. Also, look, are estimates consistently high? Most teams estimate, it could be story points, good t-shirt sizes, or just gut feel, this should take me a month. If your estimates don't match the simplicity or the complexity of the task set before you, that's a good indication that maybe my code base isn't super healthy. If it's people are giving me conceptually easy things, add an admin user, or support a new version of our protocol, which should just be changing a few bytes in a network stream. If those are like, oh, that's going to take me 3 months apiece, that's a good red flag of maybe your code is harder to work in than I think of. I also think about shotgun surgery. So this is the idea of like, I need to make a change. Let me just spray across the code base and make 17 changes. Or was it 18? 19? I think I got them all. And then you go and build it, and 6 months later, so it's like, for this performance monitoring, it doesn't have the new security model. Oh, I didn't update the 20th place. Okay. That's a shotgun surgery. Avoid that. I once worked on a system where to add a single Boolean for user configuration, I think we had to update 14 files. And I can't tell you how many times we missed one, because there was a database, there was a command line interface, there was a network a protocol interface. People would always miss one of them that wouldn't work. And really, it's like, we should have made one change that just says, yep, I added this Boolean and everything else propagates. This is a place where you may need better abstractions. All right. Oh, another great way to find that is watch your juniors. When someone onboards, if they are having a hard time knowing how to do things, or if they're missing things because they didn't know this other half of the code existed, that's a good indication that you don't have the right abstractions. All right, let's talk about when things go wrong. Uh-oh, another ballistic customer. I bet Chris broke product. Again, if there are any Chris's in the chat, this is not based on any real persons or works. It's all fictional coincidence. But I bet Chris broke product, and now I have to clean up the whole entire thing. Sam says, oops, prod went down. After an emergency meeting, we rolled out a fix, and tomorrow we'll talk about how to prevent it. Things are going to go wrong. There's no easy way to say that. There will be things that go wrong. We're still a relatively young profession. We're still learning a lot of best patterns, and things change very, very fast. Things are going to go wrong. So I like measuring time to fix. And I don't just mean, oh, I was told about this, I made a change in an hour and I committed it. I mean time from when the company hears about it to the fixes in the customer's hands. And I like measuring this to see how responsive we are as an organization. I learned very early on in my career that some companies, they may have more bugs than the others, but if they are more responsive to fixing and they can turn around, bug fixes in a consistent and high quality way, people think more highly of them than the people who may not have as many bugs, but the bugs are bigger, and you ask them to fix and they say, we'll get it to you in 8 months. I'm sorry, I don't know. So when you think about what goes into diagnosing and fixing an issue, number one, logging and tracing is super, super important. Oftentimes, you're going to have systems where you can't put a debugger on, or it's going to be production. Being able to get logs, good quality logs. I don't mean log every single thing in your code base. Log the important things. Maybe the checkpoints throughout a workflow, maybe just error conditions. But the idea is, when you have an error, you should be able to be handed a log file. Never get into a debugger and have a theory of, I think I know what's going on, or I think I understand what's happening. If you have multiple components, think about transaction IDs or correlation IDs, where one ID is shared amongst components per workflow or transaction, so that you can kind of piece things together. You also want to think about fault isolation. In a big enough system, you're not going to know where the thing breaks unless you have a nice crash dump or exception thrown saying, here's my stack trace. So being able to say, hey, my system's this big. Can I just look at this system and see if that's the problem? Being able to separate boundaries of a system or inject data into that system just to say, does the problem still show up if I do this, is a huge help. Because again, you want to be able to diagnose the problem quickly. You can't fix the issue until you diagnose it. You also want to make sure that you're reproducible. You want to make sure that you can say, hey, I got this error. I saw that, here's the HTTP request that made us crash or slowed us down or whatever. I want to be able to say, can I inject that HTTP request into a staging system or a system on my machine and reproduce the error? Having tools that can inject errors or inject conditions like that are just a godsend when you're trying to figure out what's going on. And you also want observability. You don't want a customer to say, hey, you broke everything, give me my money back. You like them to say, hey, something's broken. You go, I know, I saw it. I already have a fix. We're about to go deploy it. It instills confidence to the customers. So can you tell that there's a bug happening before your customers do? Or is your user count sharply dropping? Is the number of transactions you're doing sharply dropping? CPU on your database, IO on your database? It's going to be different for each and every one of you. I can't give prescriptive advice, do this, do this, do this. But think about what matters in your system, what can tell you when something goes wrong, and observe it. Put it on a screen in the team room or have a Slack bot. Just chat, hey, we're below a certain threshold here. Someone should go check on this. Catch it before your customers do. They will be much happier. You also need to make sure developers have confidence in change. So a lot of times when you come across a bug, you start diving in and you go, this is going to be a really big change. I don't want to break everything. I'm going to put a little Band-Aid in here. And yeah, the bug will still happen, but only to 1% of people instead of 50%. Well, if you have as you scale, you have 1 million users, 1% of that's pretty big. You need to give developers a way to have confidence in the changes they're making. And tests are going to be the main way you do that. Lynching, testing, static analysis, anything that can help developers say, you know what, I can make this change, and I don't feel like I'm going to break anything else. Because if they feel like things are fragile, if they feel like they're going to break other things, they're not going to make the right change. They're going to try to put a little shim over here and just cross fingers that it's not going to happen again. Throw locks around this. That should make everything better and performance points. Give developers the tools they need so they can have confidence they change. I also really strongly believe in having a post-mortem for any major thing that goes wrong. Alex says, I don't need a post-mortem. Don't waste my time. That's Chris that broke it. Sam says, hey, if this happens now, it can happen again. Why didn't our process and system stop it? I think back, there was a AWS US East 1 outage a couple years ago. I worked in cloud sort of things, not for AWS, but something related. And I remember seeing their post-mortem on it. And they said somebody typed in a wrong command and took down a whole bunch of our Eastern Seaboard machines. And they said that wasn't their fault. There were no safeguards to prevent that. That's the actual issue there. So a good post-mortem is blameless. We're not saying who did what wrong. Now, I say that with a little grain of salt, because if someone keeps messing up the same thing again and again and again, stop having that person do that thing and get better training. But the goal of postmortem is not to single that person out. It's to say, hey, how did this system fail us? What went wrong that got us into this situation? Because it might happen again. We hire someone new on, they make a similar mistake. Or, our cloud provider goes down and we're dead in the water. Figuring out the system's faults is way more productive than playing the blame game, as much as other people might want to play the blame game. Postmortem should also be documented. I love looking through old postmortems of teams to be like, what are the sort of issues you run into? Especially when I join a new company. Hey, do we worry about crashes, memory leaks? Do we worry about, these sort of bugs? Having that documentation aligns people in the moment and provides a record for people in the future. A good postmortem is actionable. There are actual, here's what we need to do when we are going to go schedule these things. If you don't do that, your postmortem is useless as far as I'm concerned, because you're not going to change anything out of it. And a good postmortem examines both your process and your code. As software engineers, we like to say, yep, code, that's all I do. But there's a whole process around this, whether you're doing Agile or Extreme or Lean or Kanban or Waterfall or whatever. Did something in the process break down? Oh, we don't do enough, penetration testing. Or we don't do enough load and stress testing. That's a thing of process that you might need to take a look at. So here's my post-mortem template. What happened and when? Also, probably how long was it we in the state? Just very objectively, this is what happened. This was the impact. Here's when it happened. Why did it happen? What failed that got us into this state? Then I really like this question. How did we find out? Because people are going to learn, like you might have some juniors on the team who have no idea how to debug what happens when your system is just like thrashing pages constantly, or it's dropping HTTP requests. And you might have to say, listen, here's how I went and found out. I looked here. I looked at these logs here. I looked at this dashboard. I can correlate those to tell me this. How did we debug it? How did we go figure out where the specific problem was? And that's another invaluable skill that juniors would take. And finally, what was the fix? How did we fix it? That is just, it's important to set that up as a pattern of, yes, we didn't just fix it by band-aiding, and we're like, here's how we go through a methodical process to figure out how to fix this. I've had playbooks built out of post-mortems before. We said, hey, this happens again, and it did, a couple times a year. We had a playbook that we just wrote after a post-mortem says, do this step, this step, this step, this step, check this, do this. So that way it just became mechanical and rote, and we felt comfortable handing that off to some of our more junior engineers when this big bad thing happened, because we knew what the fix was, and we documented how to apply it. You always want to have action items in your post-mortem template. So here's things that I like as action items. For every single thing that we went well, how do we make those easier to do? You've ever heard about the pit of success? It's the idea is, the metaphor is, you're walking around a giant hole. Oh, you make a slip. It's really easy to fall into that hole. Be really nice. That was the right thing to do. Maybe it's filled with bubbles or unicorns or something cuddly. Rather than falling into a caldera of a volcano. Like, you want people to succeed by accident. If an accident happens, they do the right thing by default. That's what we want to do. Make things so frictionless that the right thing to do is the easiest. For the things that don't do so well, how do we stop doing those? I always fall into the volcano when I walk on the edge. Maybe I should build some rails. How do we prevent this from happening again? Critical question. I always want to make sure that we have an action item like, how do we prevent this? How can we notice it earlier? And then almost every postmortem I do, there's always some open questions. Hey, why didn't we see this last February when X happened? Hey, I thought this was supposed to fix it. Why isn't that fixing it? Making sure that we've documented we need to go research this because there's something we don't understand about our system is a really, really important thing. That's things go wrong. Things go right. So, I want to be a little more optimistic on this section. Alex has just finished fighting all those fires, and then he deployed a new feature. I wonder if anyone uses this. Let me tell you, it sucks when you deploy something, and like 3 months later you go, why are there no bugs about this thing? Like, is everyone happy with it? If there's no bugs. It's either you built something really, really well, and it's working perfectly, which we all like to believe, or no one's using it. So, of course, there's no bugs. So, not knowing that just kind of sucks. You want to see the impact of your work. Sam says, another day, another deploy. It's nice to see a dashboard with so many active users. Observability is going to come back here. Don't just observe the things that can go wrong. Observe the things that can go right. New deploys, new features, the usage of those. How many people are using your system? That gives impact. And it also helps you back up things when someone says, hey, I need you to work on feature X. You can look at your dashboard and say, only 3 people used feature X this year. Is this really the right priorities and having the right discussion on that? Oftentimes we don't think about observing the right things, but it's just as important as observing the wrong things. Again, you want traceability. You want to be able to make sure that you can trace my deploy, my feature went into this code base, it went into production. I am able to trace it from end to end. I know that my code is being used. If you don't feel like your code's being used, you become despondent at work. Again, when I say you, I mean everyone on your team. We all need to think about this to make sure that we're improving the health and performance of the entire organization. I also like retrospecting on successful things. I retrospect on things that go wrong too, but those typically devolve into a postmortem. Here's my retrospective template. Some people stick to the Scrum, what went well, what didn't go so well, what are we going to stop do next time, or what are we going to stop doing. Here's what I use. Again, this is not prescriptive. This is just an idea, and find what's right for your team. But I want to say, hey, what went right? and how did we know that it went right? A lot of people like to say, oh yeah, this was really, really good. Well, what was the impact of that? Can we quantify that some way? Did we do anything different that we wanted to try and just call out whether it did or didn't? What could be further improved? And what are my further calls to action? Calls to action are just as important in retrospectives as they are in post-mortems. I've been in way too many retrospectives where it's just an event session. We all complain and moan, and then the manager says, all right, thanks for the feedback, and closes the wiki, and we all dissipate. And we're like, are we going to do anything about this stuff? Like, keep doing the right things? You have to have calls to action for this to be worth it. You want fast feedback on things as well. You don't want to be told, hey, the development team, or you don't want the development team to say, this was really important. We struggled a lot with this. We felt inadequate when this crash happened. We want better training around how to handle these things, or we want better process in place. No one wants to hear, that's absolutely right. I'm going to put it on the backlog and I'll prioritize that accordingly in 3 years. Like, handle the things while it's fresh in everyone's mind. It will improve morale, and you'll get much more effective use of whatever that task was, rather than 2 years later scraping your backlog going, are we ever going to do this? No, let's just delete it. Like, if you don't actually do the things that you called to action, it's like you didn't have calls to action in the first place. Tests. I talked about them earlier. Tests also help with knowing that, hey, things are going right. I have confidence in the change. All right, that was things going right. And I want to talk about developer communities. After I pause for a water break. So, developer communities. When I went to my first conference, I think in 2015, 2016, it was Pike, Tennessee. I loved it. It was fantastic. I said, I want to go to more of these. And I went to Strange Loop later that year out in St. Louis. And that was a much different experience because there's all these people from Netflix and Microsoft and Amazon giving presentations, and they're doing so cool things. Like, I'm just a guy who builds telecommunication software. That sounds boring. And I started getting like conference blues out of it. I was by myself as well, which didn't help. And after kind of sulking for a little bit, I realized, like, no, what I really miss is it was just such a cool community, listening to everyone talk about all the cool things everyone's doing. Hey, I work on cool stuff too. And it took a little bit of reframing of mine. And I went out to go build development communities, specific to the jobs I've worked in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something that you can do if you ever feel like you need a stronger community in your workplace or any organization you work in. So Alex says, man, I am outpacing all my teammates. They haven't even heard of our new framework yet. They need to get up to speed. Sam says, it feels like I always have to learn to keep up, which is kind of true for almost everyone in this job, right? Thank goodness for weekly tech talks and our book club. So community. This is kind of the whole entire thesis when we talk. Like, the more we build community within our organizations, the better we'll have morale, the more performance we'll have, we'll be more efficient. This is a little bit more explicit community building. Book clubs are a fantastic thing to do. It's find people who like learning new things, get together over a lunch break, or for an hour a week, and just say, hey, let's discuss a chapter. And I've found with book clubs, like, it's not just about let's discuss a chapter, but actually having someone drive questions. How can we apply this to the work we do? Is this relevant? Did we find this useful? Does anyone disagree? Like, the book club's nothing without the discussion. We can all read books by ourselves. Make the discussion valuable. You'll start seeing people grow, whether it's on a specific language, a feature, a methodology, a new way of thinking about things. And use it as a way to learn. Maybe you want to learn functional programming a little bit better. Maybe you want to learn how to do better performance tuning. Maybe you want to learn SQL better. Maybe you want to learn just how to have remote teamwork better. Pick a book, get some people who are interested in it, and discuss. The reading is just the precursor, and the discussion is the meat of what a book club should all be about. Tech Talks. I have set up Tech Talks in, I think, 3 companies that I've worked for, and I've loved having Tech Talks. Tech Talks can be as small or as big as you want. I've been in one place where we did Tech Talks once a week for 15 minutes. Someone just said, after our stand-up in the morning, I will talk about shortcuts I use on Trello. Or someone will talk about, hey, here's how you can tell which commit goes into production. We recorded them, we documented, we had a wiki so that you could see, hey, if you are interested in our pipeline, here's the Tech Talks here, team building here. having just documented conversations about whatever you want. It can have slides. It can be a live demonstration. You can make the barrier super low if you need to. It could be once a month. It could be the first Friday or something. I've also hosted tech talks where we would get 100 engineers showing up every time, and I'd have an hour talk about every other week or once a month, somewhere in that time frame. People would practice conference talks. People would show off their latest project. It was so nice to have this cross-pollination, especially in a bigger organization, of, oh, that's what those people work on. They keep saying those words. Now I understand it. Having tech talks in your workplace is just a fantastic way of knowledge sharing. It lets you know who the experts are. I remember one person, I'm like, I always know, I've seen her name. I don't know who that is, though. And one day they came up to me like, hey, can I talk about Rust? I'm like, sure. Who are you? Oh, I'm so-and-so. I'm like, I know your name. Okay, great. You're the Rust person. If I work on Rust, I know to talk to you. Finding that out, you're subject matter experts. But it just builds community because everyone's there to learn from everyone else. Again, it can be 15 minutes once a week. It can be 15 minutes once a month. But having just this regular knowledge sharing and just encouraging everyone to take part, it's been a fantastic way to build community in the workplace. I also like hackathons. These are a little bit more expensive from a corporate budget standpoint. But giving developers just time to say, hey, go work on something. Now, it could be product related, it could not be, but then just share it. So I used to be a hackathon organizer, and we'd give developers a day. We got it was like a day a quarter, and say, hey, go build something. If it's related to work, it's preferred, but we're not going to say you can't. Some people would build like long range wireless adapters for tracking their dog or something out in the neighborhood. And it's just fascinating. We would then say, okay, we're going to set up a science fair exhibit for anyone who wants to join in. If you did a hackathon and you don't want to present, that's fine. But anyone who wants to present, you can set a little booth, and you can have. And management loved going around talking to people like, "What'd you work on? Oh, that's cool. Can we put that in a product? Oh, why aren't we doing that already?" But giving developers freedom to work on what they want to work on, again, it's fantastic. The winners of the science fair would then go give a 5-minute elevator pitch slide later in the day. And we would have everyone up, like from the VP showing up, because there's like, oh, these are like what the engineers think are really, really cool. I want to know what they're doing. And it was such a great way to build community around the organization. I also like pair and mob programming. So this is more taking it back down away from an organization down to a team level. Pair programming and mob programming are super helpful for building camaraderie within the team. For pair programming, I don't know the exact terminology, but it's like the navigator driver scenario where one person is saying, here's the code I want you to write, and the other person is actually doing the typing, and then you swap every hour. I love doing that with a senior and a junior, because a senior engineer, junior engineer, because you learn so much from each other. The junior learns from the domain, but the senior engineer is going to learn all the tips and tricks kids do that they've been languishing on. Mob programming is just the nth degree, where you have a whole entire team work on a single project, maybe just for an hour, maybe for a few hours. I have not done a lot of mob programming, but whenever I have, it was a huge success. It was a way to get everyone on the team up to speed on a brand new idea that none of us were really comfortable with. It allowed us to design things better, and it doubled as a code review. So we didn't have to do code reviews. It's fantastic. So yeah, that's all I have to say about developer communities. I have a lot more to talk about that if you want to ask me questions afterwards, but I am running out of time. I'll probably actually pass time, so I want to just speed through this in a bit. Building tool.
You take your time. Yeah, take your time. I got some time.
So, building tools. There's so many complicated workflows, Alex says. I'm probably the only one who knows how to do all of them. I bet you a few people are thinking of their own little Alexes right now. I know people who this was a source of pride, that they kept so much in their head and they were the only one and they had job security, and then they left and the company fell apart in some regards. Samlin says, there's a lot to keep track here. Thank goodness there's a lot of tools to help me through the day. To me, there are 3 types of tools. Automators, these are the things that take a workflow, a process, and do it for you. Or maybe it does a part of it for you. It doesn't have to be full automation. Partial automation is useful too. There's simplifiers, which is, there's something really complicated. Can I just take a window into that process, or can I dumb it down to something simple so that it's easier to understand at a glance? And there's revealers, things that expose what used to be private information about the system. And I'm not talking about PII, do not expose personally identifiable information, but something like Stats for Nerds. If you've ever gone to YouTube and one of the little settings bars, there's something called Stats for Nerds. And if you click it, it gives you every stat that you want to know about video quality, audio quality, frames per second. Like, that's useful for people when they're doing video analysis. They could have kept that completely like hidden in a database. They exposed it right in their UI, and that was a nice revealer. And I talk about tools because I believe everyone is a tools team. Sure, you may have a DevOps team or a platform team or a DX team. Those teams should be enabling everyone else to write tools better. Because as soon as you separate a team out into their own little thing and say you're building a platform or you're building our pipelines, they're going to start losing some of the knowledge, the day-to-day domain knowledge that the rest of the teams are gaining. There are going to be tools that are going to be specific to that domain knowledge. You want to make sure that anyone can create a tool. I talked about a tale of two developers. Now I'm going to talk about a tale of two tools. So on one hand, tools should be beginner-friendly. When I have a tool, if I hand it to someone who's been at the company for a week or two, they should say, all right, yeah, I know how to do the basic workflow. I can see where that'd be useful. But you also want it to be expert-friendly. A lot of people do one of these but not the other. You want to make sure that the power user has a lot of knobs they can turn that is going to make their life easy as well. Like, yeah, the beginner doesn't need to know the 5 command line arguments that are going to tell them the big, deep dive into analysis. But you want to make sure you have those options for your experts. Your tools should be standalone. That means that I shouldn't have to do a lot of setup to run them. I don't have to go set up my own environment or spin up 10 million VMs or install 3,000 dependencies. Like, tools should be as standalone as possible. I pull down this tool, I use it. At the same time, tools should be composable. I should be able to take this tool and build it into bigger tools. You think about, this is just a simple tool that tells me number of users per day. And I just put that up on our wiki as a graph or something, or like a Grafana board. But then someone says, hey, I want to build a bigger dashboard to present in a bigger picture. I want to compose year one metric and do a much bigger things. You need to think about, how do other computers use this? How do other people consume this? Can they build off of it? Are there hook points for them? Your tools also have to have good UI, and I don't just mean graphical user interface, but if it's text, if it's a web page, if it's a UI, or if it's a GUI, you need to have a good user interface and a good user experience. People actually want to say, like, yeah, that tool helped me out. And you also want to make sure computers can use this tool so that you can put it, hey, this checks for security vulnerabilities. Great, let's put that in our CI. Lots of tools end up making their way into automation. As you're building tools, think about the adoption curves. There's many of them out there. This one is pretty similar to my own experience of, you'll have some early adopters. People are like, yeah, I'll use this tool, great. And then it starts gaining some steam, but almost half the people will you'll have resistance to change of why they should use this tool. Don't push it. Identify tools that will help people. Let that happen organically. Like, you're forcing tools into the hands of resistant users just creates conflict, and it just creates consternation for most people. Alex says, I rewrote our parsing library in Rust, and I'm going to tell everyone to start using it tomorrow. Good luck, Alex. I've been there. I've been that arrogant. It does not work like that. Sam says, hey, this tool really helps me. Let me ask around to see if a few people would find it useful, and then I can expand it. We go through all this agile training of how do we do incremental software development, but sometimes we forget to say, well, how we deliver tools for other people. You can almost think of it like a startup where I need to get an MVP out to see if there's interest. All right, who are my power users? Who's going to get the most bang for their bucks? Let me put some features in for them and treat it like you're marketing a product. So that's building tools. Lastly is enacting change. So how do we actually, I've told you all these things. How do you actually go implement this in the workplace? Well, Alex says, I supervise some juniors. I'm the senior, so they'll have to learn a lot to keep up with me. Alex is your deity of choices or non-choices, gift to the earth. And he thinks that everyone has to go to his speed, where Sam says, mentoring and guiding engineers is an important responsibility. I need to keep an ear out for pain points. So for the junior engineers in the crowd, here's my advice to you of how do you enact these sort of changes in the workplace. Find your early adopters. Find the like-minded people. Find the people who said, yeah, this sounds cool what you're doing. I'll try it out. I'll give you honest feedback. Strength comes in numbers, and it's going to be, when you're a junior engineer, you have this tiny little sphere of influence, unfortunately. Some people are going to listen to you, and some people are not. And that's unfortunate, but in my experience, that's true. But if you find the people who are your early adopters, your sphere of influence starts to grow. You start getting inertia, and it gets a lot harder to say, oh, no, don't do that. But also don't try to reinvent the wheel. I was at a place where I was working on some test automation, and it wasn't the best test automation. Like I was writing it not as part of my job because it wasn't getting done anywhere else. So whenever I had spare time, I'm like, I'm going to try to make this a little bit better. And our team was using it really, really well. And another team's like, oh, we have the same use cases. I want that test automation too. And I said, well, you can add on to our stuff. You're more than happy to. I'll explain it. I'll help you, all that sort of thing. It's not great. And they said, it doesn't do exactly what we want to do. I'm going to write our own. And to this day, I still do not think they have finished writing the automation. While my original team is just plugging away, like, could have used ours. It's like, it's there. Just be careful reinventing the wheel. When you see something, it might be like, oh, this is a great way to doing things. It might even be the superior way. That doesn't mean it's going to go swimmingly into an organization. I've come across many times where I've, in hindsight, a little bit arrogantly said, like, oh, everyone will use this. This is so much better. But I forgot about the people behind the screen. Like, everyone's a person. They're all going to have their own opinions, dreams, goals, failures, mistakes, whatever. I have to think about them too, and like, I can't just shove things on top of them. You also scale appropriately. Don't try to change the entire company your first week there, unless that is why you were there. If someone is saying, yes, I hired you so that you can change the company. Like, understand the environment around you. Understand what is happening and how things work. Talk to your mentors. Say, I think this is a good idea. Treat it as an experiment. How do I make this better? How do I know this is a good idea? How do I know I'm doing the right thing? Conduct your experiments, collect data, adapt, plan, improvise, repeat. For the mid developers, the mid-stage developers, your normal, you might have a senior developer in your title, or you might just have a few years under your belt. That's kind of what I'm targeting with this next set of advice. Identify the pain points. You've been around for a little bit. See where the juniors are struggling. See where your other mid-level engineers are struggling. And the first step of a problem is identifying it, knowing that it's a problem, because then you can say, is it worth solving? And then how do we solve it if it's worth solving? Retrospect often. You're probably going to have a little bit more, you might have a little bit less career inertia than some of your senior engineers. So you should be the one really pushing. We should retrospect on this. We should see what we're doing more. Typically, you see a lot more mid-level engineers than your senior and your junior. You can kind of think of it like a bell curve. At least in most of the organizations that I've observed, it may not be true everywhere. I'm sorry if it's not for you and this advice is not applicable. For me, most of the people I've worked with are just mid-level engineers. And those, like, getting them being the big voice of we should retrospect has been a huge help in the places I've worked. You also have to understand that as a mid-level engineer, you are a bridge. You are a bridge from the fresh-eyed junior engineers and the cantankerous graybeards over here, the senior engineers. You are there to bridge them. Hey, there may be the enthusiasm of the junior, but the knowledge of the senior. How do you bridge those together to come up with new ideas? And for those grizzled graybeards on the team, the senior principal, staff, fellow, whatever engineers, keep an ear to the ground. It's important not to lose your touch. Don't go retreat into an ivory tower. Think and say, okay, what do I hear in my day-to-day going on? Don't skip out on meetings with juniors just because they're juniors. Like, they have very valuable insights that you may not be thinking of. Go and sit with other people. This is one of the most important things a senior engineer can do, because your senior engineers are going to be the people who have a lot of knowledge tied up in them, and they need to share that. If they're not sitting down with others, learning about their problems and helping them, they're never going to share that knowledge, and it's going to stay cooped up in that senior's brain. Beware the curse of knowledge. So when you have been in a place long enough, you start saying, oh, doesn't everybody know about blah, 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 blah? Like, that's just so simple. forgetting that it took you 2 or 3 years to really deeply grok the information in there. Like, beware that the more you know, the simpler everything's going to look like. Don't lose empathy for the juniors or the people new. They don't have the 2 or 3 years of just deep knowledge dive on that one topic that you might, or that 5 or 10 years of just general development. So make sure that you're not excluding anybody by making, oh, that's easy. Well, it may not be easy for everyone. We were all juniors once. And it's important for senior engineers to set the tone. People are going to look up to you as senior engineers. You don't need to be the one saying, we should do a post-mortem on this. You should do a retrospective on this. Even if they don't, you should still do that. There's been a few jobs I've been in where it's like, you know what? I'm going to go start writing post-mortems whenever we have a bug, even if someone else did it. And after a while, the junior engineers were like, this is really useful. We're going to start doing this too. And that's how you change culture. So that's what I have for enacting change. And we reach the end of our story. Sam and Alex are go on to different careers now. They're burned out of their current jobs. Alex says, my job stinks. All I do is fight fires. The code base is a mess, and I'm the only competent one here. Alex is going to have a little bit of a tougher job getting a new job going into our current climate. Sam says, it's been a good run. Everyone will remember how much I helped them, and I grew a lot during my time here. You know what? People are going to remember Sam for that. So when Sam needs to go look for a new job, she has a big old network of people who will vouch for her and say, yeah, Sam's really good. She helped me a whole lot. She built these tools to help me. She made me a better engineer. The best engineers I've ever worked with, they were the best because they made me a better engineer. Doesn't matter how smart they were, although they were all very, very smart. They had such high emotional intelligence and empathy and knew how to make people better that I just feel better from working with them. And that's what we should all strive to be. So I said this was the end. It's not, because we're always learning. We'll switch jobs and we'll go through all of this again. There's always more we can do when we think about collaborative developer experience. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. So, like I said, my name is Pat Viafore. I'm a principal software engineer at Cloud Software Group. I do my own contracting and consulting through LLC I own. So if you want to pay me to talk to you about these sort of things, I'm more than happy for that. I'm the author of Robust Python. So if you're in the Python space, go check out that book. It's a lot of, not quite what I talked about here, but a lot of how to make your Python better for those around you. And I organize a Python meetup here in Huntsville. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. And that's all I have. So thank you so much. I'll just open the floor for questions.
Great. Thanks, Pat.
I have a bunch of chats here. Have people been asking me for questions?
Not really, but feel
Okay.
free to just come off mute and you just talk, have a conversation if you want to share your experiences or ask Pat some questions. The time for it. All right, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm interested. This is maybe a little bit narrow of a question, but you mentioned observability of features in particular, and I'm curious what your experiences are with that. And I'm curious, having never set out to do observability of specific features, I'm wondering like what level of granularity you would go to, or how you think about choosing what features you're trying to observe.
So I like to think about observability anytime you do any observability, there's a question you need answered. So if I'm thinking about features, I want to know, is the job I'm doing impactful and matter? So if I'm working on, maybe there's a thing I'm working on for a month, I might group that all into a giant feature. It might be, I'm adding an AI, chatbot to something, or I'm adding a new web page to a system. Just that simple. How many people see this a day or interact with it a day? Can give me if I see 1 million people going to our homepage, 10 people using our AI chatbot, I'll be disheartened a little bit, but it's going to help me know, okay, maybe I shouldn't be working on this as much. And I can use that in conversations with my PMs, my managers of, are we missing something here? Like, why do we think this is helpful? I feel this time is much better spent. That's coming from me as a more senior engineer. I would probably never do that as a junior engineer. Telling my PMs, that sort of thing. But so if I'm trying to answer that question, that might be there. It might be, for predicting load. Hey, how many people are hitting our site in a day? Or how many people are using this feature? Like, do I need to scale this up? like that's a question I might want to answer. So it's all going to come down to what's important to you. I framed it as for when you're doing the right thing. So like if I'm doing the right thing, I want to know that the thing actually has impact. I want to see some metric of business value increase. How can I show that, or how can I find a reasonable proxy for that? I've used it mostly as far as I'll share an anecdote. So I used to work on a tools team that was trying to break up our big monolithic C++ code base into packages. And we ended up building a dashboard to say, how many packages are we releasing a day? And we were able to say, oh, we're doing really great in this area, this section of the company. This section of the company is not doing packages whatsoever. Having that observability, it helped us answer, are we actually reaching people? Or are we just shouting into the void? And it allowed us to kind of change our game strategy and say, okay, these people over here, they're doing things all right. We probably don't need to be talking to them as much. Let's start doing rounds every day in that wing of the building they're not using packages. Just say, hey, can I help you with anything? And it was way better than waiting 3 months to then have their manager complain in a meeting and saying we should never have done this in the first place. Instead, it built that camaraderie early on. And if we didn't have that observability, we would have just been singing to the choir and just cherry picking the anecdotal good evidence.
Thank you. That's very helpful and great info overall.
Thank you.
I had a question about postmortems.
Yeah.
I've only done 2 postmortems over my 6-year career, and I feel like I haven't done enough of them or really, gotten to really get the value. Do you do them for every bug or incident?
No, not every,
or
not
big
every bug.
disasters, or
My
where's the
baseline
line,
is any time my manager's manager complains about a bug to me. Because if it goes to a high enough level that there's visibility, I want to know, because I don't want my manager's manager to talk to me about bugs. I'm fine if he talks to me about other things, but I don't want my VP to be knocking on my door and say, hey, your team dropped the ball. Why are we losing this much money because of this? That's a very uncomfortable talk to have with someone who outranks you by 3 or 4 levels. And as you move on in your career, that happens. So at the very least, whenever that happens, to say, I don't want to do that ever again. How do we stop that? I will also do it for bugs that take 2 weeks, a week or 2 to fix and solve. Because that typically means, so I do a lot of systems programming. So digging into OS information, tracing syscalls or things like that. Things that my junior engineers on my team might not know as well, I'll document in a post-mortem and then share it with the team. So I'll do the post-mortem as I'm doing it. Here's what I'm trying. Here's how I'm figuring it out. And then after I've solved it, I will go write a conclusion and kind of fill in the gaps. And then I'll go present that to the team because hey, I just had to deal with this. It took me 2 weeks to figure this out. And nobody else really knew what to do either. It just landed on my plate. Here's what I learned so that you can do it next time. Again, the idea of a post-mortem is not, what went wrong, I'm going to blame them. It's how do we get better as a team or as an organization to not have this happen again? Only through sharing that information are you going to find that out. I had a slide that said scale appropriately for developer communities, I think it was. Scale appropriately for everything of this. It could just be, it doesn't have to be my template. Just having something and just saying at the end of a stand-up, hey, here's what I found out about this team. Does anybody want to learn more? Here's a wiki page or something, or here's, a page. It can be as simple as that. And if people don't find value in it, don't do them or do something different. They're only useful if people are going to consume them. So, and that's going to depend on culture, on your team, on your organization. I still think they're valuable. People might not agree with me. And then the trick is, how do I convince them they're valuable if you feel so strongly about that?
Nice, thanks.
Yeah, and I again want to reiterate, nothing I've said is prescriptive of here's how you should do any one thing. Take away the ideas of, especially if you take away the ideas of this is how I can build a community, this is how I can make people around me better. Here's how I can allow other people around me to make me better. I mentioned tech talks. I was selfish. I'm I want everyone else to teach me all these things. I'm going to start doing tech talks, try to get other people to do things. But there's this network effect as you start building those up. And I've found it just to be a much better experience as a team when we start doing these things and actually take them seriously.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've been wanting to start a book club for a while, and I think I'm finally going to do that. Been talking about it for a while, but I actually want to start it, like on my team.
Yeah. Like I said, the big thing is just discussion. Was in a book club a couple years ago, and it was literally it was a manager-led idea, and I really wish it succeeded. But every time it was like, all right, here's the book club, and he said, did anyone read the chapter? No, it was too busy. No, I didn't this week. And then he would just say, well, here's what it was about, and that was it. These things are only useful if they're consumed, and it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. But if you're not going to have people who are actually willing to consume these ideas or like share them with you, honestly, they're not going to work as well. And so where I go back to scaling appropriately, I'm in a book club right now with 2 other people because we just said, hey, we want to learn newer things from C++ better. You guys want to just read this book and see how it goes? If we don't like it, we'll stop. But you know what? We're making sure that we're having discussion. I try to gather discussion points ahead of time, remind people, come with a discussion point or 2. And I'll have some canned ones just to make sure in case it falters. It's been working out great. Make things as big or as small as you need to get them to work. But I will also say a lot of these things do involve extra work. So I will not lie about that. Can you get enough benefit from the things so that the extra work doesn't matter? And the things I've been talking about today, I honestly believe I do. Everyone's going to have a different experience. Your mileage may vary for all the people on the call. Any other questions?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah. Just as I'm a learner, I'm not like a software developer, not there yet, but I'm learning. And I do have one question. How do you like maintain team motivation and like team motivation during longer cooperative projects? Like in your company, basically, like how do you like guys like stay like motivated even though the project is like longer? Like how you guys
so
pushing?
some things to be aware of. There will always be troughs and valleys of team participation and motivation. You're not going to be able to have consistent motivation all the way through. People burn out at different times. The people will reinvigorate at different times. So I would caution at saying, go like, how do I keep you motivated all the way through? When I hosted tech talks, there were times where I was like, no one is doing tech talks, and we took a few months break. The trick is what helped me is I found people who were interested in this sort of developer experience as I was, and I let them hold me accountable, and I would hold them accountable too. People would offer to share the load and said, hey, I'll host a few tech talks if you're getting burned out. Oh, hey, I'm buried with bugs. If I'm not buried with bugs, maybe I'll offer to go help them. So a lot of it is just team building. There's a lot good culture and good team building come a long way, and that helps with that. I'm going to be honest. If you have poor team culture, a lot of these things might fall on deaf ears. You really have to think about team culture. If you're just getting started, it can be tough to enact that change. But if you can find people who have a similar mindset as you or similar goals as you, you can work together. And you might not be able to keep team motivation high all the time, but maybe you can have 2 or 3 people keep motivation high, and that will help infect the team with motivation later on. Not every team's going to be perfect. There's going to be people who drag it down. There's going to be toxicity. A lot of that is just, that's just part of human nature as we work with each other. Don't get discouraged if you're feeling a trough. Just always ask yourself, okay, do I feel strong enough that I need to get back into this? And if the answer is yes, come up with a game plan with some, confidants or people that you trust to help you do it. I'm right now going through something similar. The pandemic killed my meetup, and working up the energy to start up that meetup again is just so monumental for me. But it's okay. I know what I have to do to restart it, and I'm looking for some of my co-organizers, like, okay, how can we build each other up and hold each other accountable so we actually restart this thing?
Yeah, do it.
All this was today was a long-winded way of me saying it's natural for motivation to wax and wane. Don't be discouraged. Just tenacity and camaraderie will help you through it.
Yeah, I have something to add on that. I mean, I think fun is kind of underrated, like having fun, like reminding ourselves why we got into this in the first place. Like a lot of it, I mean, coding is fun and it can be fun, and creating an environment where you can like code with each other, like not even on things that you need to deliver, but like you can practice, do katas and things like that. So those are some things that I've done with my team, and been able to like do deliberate practice and using katas and learning TDD and refactoring and stuff like that, and just kind of honing our craft with those kind of things. And I think that helps with that motivation sustained. Yeah.
And I mentioned book clubs. You can have a coding club, 1 hour a week during a lunchtime. So I say, like, hey, let's all do a quick little fun competition, like Advent a Code or Project a Boiler, and then just discuss what we did afterwards. And like, it can be small and it can still be effective.
Hello?
Yes,
Yeah,
hello.
I think
There we
Pat
go.
just I didn't
Any
really
other
have
questions?
a
Oh, go on. Sorry.
yeah, I don't have a question, but I'm dealing with traceability right now. I just was like over the last week investigating like this issue that happened with our system and like multiple microservices, and you just can't tell a whole story about it. Like there's logs, and it's like missing context, and like there's no like, what you're talking about, like transaction ID, that kind of stuff. So that's some improvements that our team is going to make, a new code base that we've taken over. So that stuff's very important.
Yeah, and that's what I call a revealer. Like, find a tool that just says, don't invent like the world first time. Just, hey, can I have a tool that just finds, given a transaction ID, goes and downloads all the logs and strips out everything that doesn't have that. It may not tell you the full story, but now you have 30% of the story or something. And okay, like what do you? Every time the tool fails, you ask yourself, what can I add onto it so it helps me next time?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
always small steps to take that you can say, okay, just having those transaction IDs help tell that story, or maybe you start getting into, maybe your first way is just let me just grab logs. Maybe your second way is let me make those logs structured so I can have a computer consume them and parse them, or maybe I visualize them. Like might be a year or two long journey, but will help every single person after you who has to deal with distributed microservices, because that's a hard problem.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I see someone with a raised hand, the iPhone.
Yeah, this is my second question. So how do you handle like conflicts or differences in opinions within a collaboration setting? Like basically in your work.
The optimistic answer is, well, for one, accept that they're always going to happen because we're all human. If you have toxic people in your team, that is very, very frustrating. And that's something that management has to handle. If you have difference of solutions, my main advice is just recognize that everyone that you're talking to is a human, and they're going to have their own opinions and their own life experiences. Try to understand where are they coming from, and make sure they're listening to where you're coming from as well. A lot of times when we have two different ways of saying, hey, I want this or that, a great question is, what data could you tell me that would make me change my mind? Like if I'm arguing with someone, they say, hey, we should really do it this way. The best way to answer that is like, what experiment can we do that's short and like quick for us to tell that could convince one of us? Like admitting what would change your mind to the other person is a great way to understand, yes, my way wasn't the right way. I never even thought that you were considering that. Unfortunately, a lot of that is just talking with humans, and that's its own skill separate from technical altogether. I like to say behind every technical problem, there's probably a people problem somewhere. So I don't have any specific resources, but I'd search out just good good books on intra-team communication, how to have emotional intelligence and empathy. And the pessimistic answer to that is if you're dealing with toxic people, if you're dealing with people that are very, very difficult to change, and that change is important to you, you have to ask yourself, is this the right setting that I want to be in? Maybe there's something you can do to change that setting. Maybe you need to change your setting. Without knowing your specific situation, I can't say one way or the other, but I always say if people are acting in good faith, try to understand each other's viewpoints, try to come up with quantitative data that can help enforce what's the right way or not.
Also, don't forget, use good programming practices, interfaces, subclasses. So you can kind of experiment with this stuff, and if you think you have a better way, but you're not sure and you need a quick fix, put in the thing you know, and then later on you can fix it. As a matter of fact, one thing I really learned on a project very interesting was factorization. It doesn't always have to be global. I made a lot of small changes because of the test code that made the code look 1,000 times better. Just local changes. Didn't have to change any of the APIs or stuff like signatures. Just local changes, and it really made the code look cleaner.
You bring up a really good point with the technical side of things. When people say make your code easy to change, there's also something implicit in there is make your code easy to delete, except that your way might be wrong. There's something you weren't thinking of. If your code's really easy to delete and swap something else in, great. I like the saying, treat your code like cattle, not pets. You should never be afraid to take it to the slaughterhouse.
Also, one other thing is, if you really want observability, one of the good things you can do at the very low level of logging, just put in statements that describe what's the code doing. My team lead one time went around and he was asking people, how did you learn the workflow? They all said, oh yeah, we looked at Chuck's log files. And as a matter of fact, one team didn't. They spent 3 weeks trying to figure out what to do. They finally called me and I had it fixed in 10 minutes.
Another one for observability. I love to hear it.
Yeah, and then another example of like two opposing ideas. This often happens with like pair programming and mob programming. You'll have like two ways of solving the problem, and you say, "Hey, let's do them both. Like let's like not just talk about it. Like let's see the code, like, and let's actually see it concretely and compare the trade-offs of the two." And that's a good way too. Yeah, I mean, if it's cheap to do, you know, if you're in an environment where you can actually do that. But that's a good approach as well.
And one thing to add off your thing is, if you don't have the time, make a JIRA issue out of it. You know, so you can at least remember it and put a little bit in, describe it, because you can at least remember it, and then you can come back to it later on when you got the time. Sometimes you don't have the time to implement the best way.
Yeah, but you can kind of maybe have a spike to explore which way. Yeah, that works. Any other questions for Pat? Basically, once we're out of questions, we'll end for the day. I don't have any other activities planned tonight. All right. Well, I'm gonna call it then. Thanks, Pat. This is great. It's even better the second time. Hey, what's up?
Don't forget, Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
So I'll just make a couple announcements. We're gonna be having another talk next month with Garrick West. He's a technical coach. He's gonna be talking about test-driven development and like ways that you can basically start to learn it at like different levels. And then in March, I'm gonna be talking about long methods and different ways that you can refactor long methods and you know, renaming things, making better names, naming as a process, things like that. And then in April, we're gonna have Arlo Belshi and he's going to be talking about legacy code. And I mean, that's kind of his wheelhouse. To be determined what else he's going to talk about. But that's very exciting. And then in May, we're also going to have some unknown speaker that could be somebody in the audience. There's a spot open. If you want to contact me and you have a topic to present, just you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or we also have a Discord, which you should be able to find in the meetup. But if you have trouble finding that, please let me know and join the community and we can chat there. All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. Good night, everyone.
Question, one more. Sorry.
Hey.
Did we drop our LinkedIn or no?
Yeah.